You ever wondered what you should name your channel, your LinkedIn, your YouTube, your podcast, your newsletter? Today we're talking about all the brand names you could possibly choose in the world that you create for yourself online. Check it out. Welcome to the show. Today we're talking about all the places we can be online and how to manage what we are calling ourselves in all the different places. Now, it can be really confusing because your name on LinkedIn and your name on your social media profiles typically is the same. It's how you spell your name minus maybe a space or something like that. But when you start creating extra things like a show, a newsletter, a website, a podcast, then it gets a little confusing because you might want to name those things something else. And that's what we're talking about today. How do you build brand relevance and consistency with the names that you choose? So, first things first, the most important thing you can do is own your channels. Own your channels means grab the handles that you are interested in right away, because a lot of the time those handles may already be taken by other people. Specifically, the @ sign on your YouTube channel, your Instagram, your social media profiles, a lot of those are competitive because some names are redundant. Unless you're lucky to have a name like mine that is awful to spell, but unique, it could be hard to find. If you are John Stevenson or Kim Johnson, right? There might be lots of people with names like yours. So securing your social handle is important. And hopefully building some consistency across those handles is the number one thing. And that could be that you are now Kim Johnson 7 across all channels, or the Kim Johnson, or the official Kim Johnson. Whatever it is, make it consistent across all your channels and grab them as soon as possible. I'd also recommend grabbing the website URL of your name. You may never use it, but maybe one day in the future, you might decide that you want your brand to be more online than it is today, and you want a home for that, and your name is the easiest place to go. I have owned brandonberkmeyer.com for a long time, and I didn't use it for years. I used brandsonbrands.com when I started the podcast and consulting and coaching. But when I started speaking and I wrote a book, I decided I needed a place that was for that specifically. And brandonberkmeyer.com was there. I owned it. It was easy to use, and I can specifically orient it to those types of things. So owning your domains, owning the places that you could post things is important. Now, the second thing in terms of owning your name is if you have a show name, a book title, a podcast title, you might want to own that name as well. So finding out where you can grab those social handles, those URLs, is also important. Now, the name of those things sometimes is more generic than your name. If you have a show, for example, Brands on Brands is the name of my show, maybe there are other shows that were already called that. So figuring out what you're calling yourself in the first place is important. Now, it doesn't have to be unique. If there was already another Brands on Brands something out there, maybe there was a book already called that, but there wasn't a podcast, I could still call my own channels Brands on Brands, but I might want to add something to the end, like podcast. And maybe my channel is called Brands on Brands Podcast. There's lots of ways to do this, but figuring out what would people actually type in the search when they're looking for my show, that's what's important. Something that is identifiable to you. Now, a lot of these brand names are already taken. A lot of the generic names are already taken, but I would recommend if you can include the word that would tell people a little bit more about the thing you're creating in that title, that would help. Why is that? Well, when you are looking for something like when I was writing the book, Front and Center Leadership, when you're looking for leadership books, it helps the websites and people who are looking for the books understand what your book's about by including that word in the title. It makes it a little bit more generic, but then you use other words to make it less generic. So front and center was my unique term, and leadership was the generic term that helps people understand what my thing's about. So, for example, if you had a show, a podcast, and it was just called Front and Center, you wouldn't really know what that show was about. But when you add the word leadership to it, you're like, oh, okay, it's a leadership show. But could have also been called Front and Center Racing, right? And then it'd be a totally different show. So those adjectives matter. Now, if that show was just called leadership or just called racing and it didn't have front and center in front of it, you'd be missing the point entirely. So as you're starting to own your channel, start to think about, does the words I'm using have something generic that helps people identify what it is, but also something specific to me? And then go and own those channels. The great thing about owning your channels is the earlier you get them, the more likely it is that they're yours, but you could always change them. The channel names are the easiest thing to change. You don't have to be worried that you're making a hard decision or a bad decision right up front because they're easy to change. URLs, buying them, you may have to get rid of one and buy a new one, but a handle on a YouTube channel or a podcast or a social media platform, very easy to just revise and change and keep all the history of content you've produced and things you put out into the world. So own your domains. Second thing you can do is think about your names by the place that it's going to be. A lot of people struggle with this because they're trying to think of one name for every place. And while that can work, it's not the only way it has to work. So I don't have to have my podcast and my website and my social handles and my book all be called Brands on Brands. I can choose each one of them individually and say what makes most sense for this here right now. So the show and the name being like the website being Brands on Brands and the show being Brands on Brands, in the beginning that made sense and I kept those together. But when I started to do a book, I said, you know what? I don't want the book to be Brands on Brands because I might have 5 books. I want them to be specific to themselves. So how do I tie front and center leadership back to my website? Well, I create a website that has a books tab and I send people to that tab. Or I buy a URL like front and center leadership and I forward it to my main website. Or like what I did, I owned Brandon Birkmeyer and I created that part of my identity there, the speaker side of my identity there. There's lots of ways to shape these things, but really the question is, what makes sense right now for each place? So my YouTube handle is one that's more confusing because my YouTube handle could have been my show name or it could have been my social handle name, which is Brandon Birkmeyer. The choice here for me was Brandon Birkmeyer is always going to be who I am, and I might have lots of shows, lots of content I put on YouTube. So the @Brandon Birkmeyer handle on YouTube was my go-to because then I can create a playlist later that's the Brands on Brands podcast on YouTube or some other content that's on YouTube. So you can start to decide really by asking yourself the question, what do I need this place to do for me? And what's the best name that helps me solve that problem? All right, third thing, the marketing of your channels is the most important part. So let's say you had a show and you named it something a little vague. That's okay. You are still in charge of marketing that. You could have a great name or a terrible name. It doesn't matter. You're still in charge of letting people know where to find you. For example, the name Apple for a computer makes no sense. It doesn't help people know that it's a computer. It could be anything. Now, today, obviously, you've heard that name a lot, so it makes sense to you. But if I said I work at the Kiwi company, you would have no idea that it's a computer company, right? I have to create that. If I start a Kiwi computer company, I have to go out and let the market know, hey, Kiwi computers, they are better than Apple, right? You would have to learn that from me. I'm in charge of building that brand name, but it's the same with any brand name. It doesn't matter how clever you are. They find you because of the marketing you do of that name. The cleverness isn't going to drive the discovery. You are. So when you're looking at figuring out how do I get my name out there and is it the right name, really it's whatever's right for you. And the more important job is not figuring the name out, it's telling more people about it. It's getting out there and doing the work to help yourself get found, for example, in search engine optimization. The title alone isn't going to do that. It's the content you put on the website, in the podcast, on the social channel. That's what's going to be found first, the content itself. And then they're going to be like, where'd this content come from? Oh, it came from the actual channel, which is whatever name. Most people aren't typing your show's name in or your channel's name in from scratch unless they met you in person. And then still your job is to say, well, here's where you'd go to find me, or here's the link, or scan this and it'll take you to my show. So lots of ways to get discovered. But again, your brand name is part of the equation, but really you do the work afterwards to put it out there into the world. So my big advice is pick something simple, something clear, something easy, but also align it with the thing that you want to be known for. Then own it across all the channels and also your name across all the channels, and then tell people about it. And always know that you can change it later. Those are my tips. I hope you found them useful. And if you like this, comment, subscribe. Love to hear your feedback, and catch you next time. Brands on Brands.